lacking to you. hmm As we're turning in the scriptures, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Mhm. Put in there at verse 7. Mhm. 2 Corinthians 5, 7. And it reads, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." We need to pause for the cause and give it due consideration. The context of it indicates that um, we're going through transition, and there are challenges in this period of probation. You know we're on probation, right? Uh, it's called. We have these bodies of probation, and we're going to trade them in one day. And what we do with these determines what the other one will be like. We have this seed. But in the meanwhile, he says, I want you to be looking at the unseen. I want you to be believing what God says. I want you to get a good night's sleep. It takes faith to sleep. And then I want you to eat less, exercise more. And he says, our walk in life ought to be by faith. And if you check out that word walk, it's not just talking about taking steps. It talks about what we are finding ourselves busy doing. Whatever we're doing, wherever we're going, it should be by faith. And faith doesn't come any other way. I'm not talking about natural faith. I'm talking about faith that's manufactured by God. And that comes by the power of the spoken word. So faith by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So I said, I want you to walk by faith and don't view life based upon what you see. Don't view your occupation by what you see, but by what I say. Because what we see won't always be seen. We're in transition. Not just the world around us, going from the covered wagon to the spaceship, but these bodies we live in, they're going through transition. God knew they would the moment sin came into the world, and death the consequence. Because death was passed upon all men, because in one man all have sinned. Thank God that in one man all are made alive, which is Christ. So the only way that we can enjoy our sojourn, our walk, our occupation, what we find ourselves doing from day to day, the only way that we can enjoy is to employ what God says. Not our independent thinking, not upon the scientific discoveries, not based upon mathematics, not based upon tradition, but based upon what God said. And I've concluded, and I trust you too, that God has said something, the Father has said something, the Creator has said something about everything. People talk about extra biblical materials. Well, there's a lot of material out here. But I tell you what, if you get a hold to these, we call 66 books and epistles, if we get a hold of this, we'll find that God has said something about everything. And Solomon said it very succinct when he said, there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing. Spaceships are not new. Automobiles are not new. Artificial intelligence is not new. All of that is old stuff. It always has been. It just hadn't been discovered by people who just didn't get it in time. When you read about automobiles, it talks about chariots with lanterns. When you talk about jet airplanes, I will protect you as eagles fly. I mean, if you're talking about artificial intelligence, there's a creation that's coming that can number every person on the planet and be able to monitor everybody's life. Revelation 13. There's nothing new under the sun. So God says, I don't want you to walk by sight. I don't want you to walk by man's wisdom. I don't want you to walk by your discoveries. I want you to be illuminated and regulated and invigorated so we can pass this time in our sojourn by faith. The just shall live by faith. The saints ought to be walking by faith and working by faith and fighting the good fight of faith. Everything by faith. Now, in Philippians 3, if you would, chapter 3 of Philippians, pull right in there at verse 17. Philippians 3:17. And it reads, brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk, so as ye have us for an example. Now, this is real time. This is not just historical. And he goes on to say, and I come back to 17, but in 18 it says, for many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ. They're still living after the old. They're still operating in the old context. They're still being deceived by those racial memories that obtrude themselves in our nerve substance up to our memory to make us think we lived a life we never lived, but our progenitors did. And if you want to know where I got that, I got it from Oswald Chambers. And I noted in one of our writings. There are people who are living by sight and living by feelings are people we should not be emulating. Because people who are living after the old are always deceived. They're deceived. Because there are memories in our nerve substance, in the physical body. It's in the DNA of the old. And what we were born of in parentage, that those parents were born of, and those parents were born of, and those parents were born of, it just follows through generation after generation after generation. and it lands in our nerve substance. And what's in the flesh that we're born of, physiologically and psychologically, what's born of the flesh comes up through the system and invade our brains and produce thoughts in the mind to make us think certain ways and make us talk certain ways and act certain ways that we must overcome through the cross. To say that, yes, I love me, mommy. I love me, daddy. I love me, sisters and brothers. God put solitary in families for the purpose of helping somebody that you can get to. But once we got born again, we were put in another family. It's called the family of God. We have a new father now. We have a new DNA now. We have a whole new system, a divine nature that wants to spring up out of our spirit and implode in our minds, repair our brains, reprogram, and give us a new vocabulary to articulate so we can think different, speak different, and walk different. Our occupation, we may be next to a person in an office and we're both typing. One is typing from the mechanics of the old man, and the other is typing from the inspiration that comes through faith in the one who's living on the inside. And yes, we may be typing the same words, but the meaning behind the words that are inspired from the heart gets different results. And we may not understand that and appreciate that, but it's like that. So he says now, that verse 17 again. Be followers together of me, and mark them which walk, so as ye have us for an example. So he's saying, follow faith walkers. Follow faith walkers. Don't follow people who don't walk by faith. We can love each other. We can do all kinds of things. But when you follow, make sure you're following people who walk by faith. Go with me to Hebrews. Hallelujah. Chapter 13. Hebrews chapter 13, familiar verse number 7. Here's the exhortation. Chapter 13, verse 7. Remember them which have the what? The rule over you. Yes, rule. Who have spoken unto you the what? Philosophy. Who have spoken to you the word of God. Whose what follow? Whose faith. Examine a person's faith. We all should be faith examiners. Whose faith follow, considering the end or the outcome of their conversation or their lifestyle. Watch people. Watch the way they eat. Watch the way they walk. Watch how they do things. And consider the outcome of what people do and how they do it. And if there's faith in what is said and done, the outcome is faith, and Christ is glorified, then follow. Follow that person. When I read materials, I like to read biographies and autobiographies. I really want to know the person that I'm following. Before I started reading all of Watchman Nee's materials, before I got all those volumes, I read Against the Tide by Ines R. Kinnear. The story of Watchman Nee. I said, I want to read that guy. I want to read that man. So I started reading his materials. So anybody that can stay in prison for 20 years under the Communist Party and still thrive, I want to hear what he has to say. The reason why I read so much of Oswald Chambers is because this man wasn't just giving platitudes in a seminary. He was on the battlefield in Egypt in World War I, on the battlefield with the soldiers, teaching them how to stay alive. I said, I want to hear what Oswald Chambers has to say. The reason I read so much of Philip Morrow, because this man was a global lawyer, a patent attorney, very wealthy, well-to-do. And when he was in his 40s, he met Christ and began to handle the scriptures like he did a big case before the Supreme Court. And he investigated that word. And he experienced that word. And I say, any man that would give up everything and accept every challenge and write volumes of materials and overcome sickness and disease, and even the enemy attacked his mind, and for a space of time he couldn't even make use of his own mind, but his spirit was still working. And eventually his spirit got a hold to his mind and brought it back. I want to read this man. And anytime a woman is in prison and in solitary confinement, and God turned the cell into walls of precious stones, I said, Madam Gunya, I'm going to read exactly what you say. Anytime another author, this woman, learned to read the Bible herself at 4 years of age and became a journalist and chronicled the revivals, the great revival that started from a person praying for years that would come to Europe, and she wrote the book called War on the Saints, Jessie Penn Lewis. I want to hear what she has to say. Now, George Miller is a challenge. I don't have his autobiography because there are over 3 million words in it. But I do have bits and pieces of his autobiography. I'm going to listen to a man. He has principles that he lived by. And he didn't start an orphanage just to save orphans off the street. He said he started an orphanage because there was another person who had an orphanage that inspired him to think about it. But he started an orphanage to prove that, anybody read that? That God answers prayer. In his lifetime, he took more than 10,000 children off the street and educated them, clothed them, and housed them without asking anybody for a dime. And I've been to the campus that he built back in the turn of the last century in Bristol, England. I was there and I saw it. I said, this one man's faith did all this? That's more than the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. Follow them whose faith demonstrates the outcome. That you don't have any problem recognizing the conclusion of their lifestyle. And for some people, you have to follow them for a good long time because they're in transition too while you're following. So don't make too hasty a judgment on folks. You see, God will always give us someone who's advanced more so than we are, who've been there, done that, have a few t-shirts to show it. Get that. Now go quickly with me to Romans chapter 4. Running out of time. Romans chapter 4. Pull right in there at verse 12. Romans 4 verse 12. Speaking of Abraham. And the father of circumcision of them, or to them, who are not of the circumcision only, but who also, what are the next 4 words? Walk in the steps. Okay? The reason why you only see one set of steps when you're following Abraham is because you see his step and you step right in it. You step right in his steps. So you only see one set of footprints. And don't worry about overshadowing his steps because his footsteps are a lot bigger than ours. If you read the story, you step right into his steps, walking in the steps of our father Abraham. Look at this. Who walk also, it says, also walk in the steps of that what? Faith. Walk in the steps of that faith. Will you say that with me? Walk in the steps of that faith. Shoot. When I was going through my hardest difficulties in this sojourn, I studied 2 men. I studied Abraham and David. And the reason why I studied Abraham and David is because reading Matthew, Jesus Christ relates to Abraham and David in Matthew Gospel. And so when I studied those 2 men, what I was going through was an adventure, even though I felt it in my flesh. Because I could relate to the steps that Abraham took when he was going through the changes that he was going through. And it's like God taking you up and transporting you to another place at another time. And you can see God's dealings with this man. It's like going to a movie. You know, a lot of folk like a lot of movies, and I don't like going to movies. I guarantee you I haven't been to 10 movies in my whole entire life. I don't like going. But you can go to a movie. God can take you to a a movie theater. He can transport you all the way back to the days of Abraham and let you see things. And when you come up out of that time of study and prayer and meditation, rumination, consultations, you say, ooh-wee. And then he'll take you where David's been. You can, David's slapping that lion, bam, bam. his. The lion is stronger than his. But David was anointed. He was anointed. And I know my time is up. But look at 2 Corinthians 12:18. 2 Corinthians 12:18. Get this. 2 Corinthians 12:18. I desired Titus. This is Paul talking to the church at Corinth. And with him I sent a brother. He said, I sent a brother. Did Titus make a gain of you? Walk we not in the same spirit? Walk we not in the same steps? Wow. That's powerful. There are people that we ought to be related to rightly and fully that we're walking in the same steps. Walking in the same steps. People say he's a brownie knight. No, you're just walking in the steps of brownie. Don't let anybody buffalo you. Don't let people talk negative to you. Walk in the steps of those who are proven they're living by faith. Walk in their steps. You know why? Because pretty soon somebody's going to be walking in your steps. It's not easy to walk in the steps of Abraham, but it's possible. It's not easy to walk in the steps of David, but it's possible. We have such a great cloud of witnesses that have gone before us. And we have the ultimate kind of faith that God testifies to that he pleases me. So I'm going to take him that he wouldn't even see death. That's Enoch for you. Well, that's all I have time for. It takes faith to walk. Will you tell your neighbor? It takes faith to walk. If it ain't faith, it ain't walking.